He had the suit, the boarding pass, the reservation in first class, but none of it mattered because he was black. When Malik Rowe, a quiet and powerful CEO, arrived at the airport for a routine flight, he didn't expect to be humiliated at the gate. He didn't argue, he didn't shout, he simply took the seat they gave him all the way in the back of the plane. But what the flight staff didn't know was this Malik owned the sky more than they ever could, and within days the entire airline would fall. Why did one calm man become the catalyst for corporate collapse? What silent system of discrimination had been operating beneath the surface all along? And how did a single act of quiet resistance spark a nationwide reckoning? This is not just a story about race or power. It's a story about what happens when dignity refuses to stay quiet. So buckle up, because this flight doesn't go where you think it will, if you believe stories like this need to be heard. Please like this video, share it with someone you care about, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. The rain hadn't let up since dawn. A thin sheet of mist clung to the glass facade of Durham Brooks International Airport, blurring the runway lights into soft halos. Malik Rowe stood just inside the sliding doors of Terminal 4, watching as passengers moved briskly past him, rolling suitcases and sipping airport coffee with sleepy urgency. He wore a charcoal hoodie pulled over his head, dark blue jeans, and scuffed sneakers that had seen better days. A single black backpack hung loosely over his right shoulder. If you weren't looking closely, you'd never know he ran a billion-dollar analytics firm or that the market listened when he whispered. And that was the point. He moved through TSA with the efficiency of a man who traveled often but never invited attention. No chains, no designer logos, when the agent took an extra second with his ID. Malik offered a patient nod. No one made a fuss, no one stopped him, and no one recognized him. He liked it that way. Inside the terminal, announcements echoed over the intercom as gate numbers blinked on massive digital screens. His flight, Astrafly Airlines, Flight AF726 to Seattle, was posted in soft blue letters above Gate C19. Next to it, a glowing sign, now boarding first class. Malik approached the gate calmly, joining the short priority line. There were maybe 10 people ahead, an older white man in a cashmere blazer, a couple with matching travel pillows, 2 women in business attire scrolling silently through emails. He stood quietly, third in line. He was checking a text from Noel, his assistant, just a reminder about the 3 p.m. investor call once they landed, when the gate agent's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Excuse me, sir." He looked up. Her tone was polite but firm. "That line is for first-class passengers." Her name tag read Rachel. She was tall, white, early 40s maybe. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled into a stiff bun, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm in first class," Malik said, calm and clear. Rachel blinked, then tilted her head slightly. Name Malik Rowe. Her fingers tapped rapidly across her terminal. After a beat, her brow furrowed. "That's odd. It's showing that you've been reassigned to economy. Seat 31E. I booked this 2 weeks ago." Malik replied, still level, "Paid in full, seat 2A. Rachel shrugged without looking up. "It happens. System glitch. You can talk to customer service after landing." Before he could speak again, the man behind him stepped forward, boarding pass already extended. Rachel's voice lifted, a touch warmer. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Whitmore. You're all set." Malik didn't move. I'd like to speak to a supervisor. Rachel sighed. The line was growing behind them. Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside. We can't delay the boarding process for seat disputes. I'm not disputing. I'm clarifying. You'll need to board with the economy group, she said, cutting him off with a practiced smile, the smile that said, this conversation is over. Malik paused. He had been through too much, seen too much to be surprised, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. The worst kind of prejudice always wore a polite face. A few feet away, Dennis Tran, the gate supervisor, stood watching the exchange. Their eyes met for a split second. Dennis looked away. That was enough answer. Malik nodded once. No problem, he said softly. Rachel blinked. She hadn't expected him to fold. No anger, no raised voice, just a step to the side, as instructed. As he walked toward the economy line, a quiet buzz rippled through the gate area. A man whispered to his wife. A teenage girl nudged her friend and smirked. No one said anything loud enough to be heard, but Malik felt every eye on his back. The jet bridge felt longer than usual, the kind of walk that stretches time, that reopens old wounds. When he reached row 31, he found the middle seat flanked by a coffin man on the aisle and a toddler kicking the window seat. He eased into it slowly, legs cramped, knees grazing the seat ahead. It smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. A young man slid into the aisle seat beside him, earbuds hanging from his collar. Damn, the kid muttered. We're practically in the tail. Malik smiled faintly. Feels that way? I'm Jalen, the boy said. First time flying Astra Fly. Might be my last. Malik, nice to meet you. Jalen grinned. I'm headed to Seattle. Senior year in aerospace engineering. Impressive. Jalen shrugged, opening his tablet, trying to build what they won't give us. Malik turned to the window, the tarmac wet with rain, his reflection faint on the glass. Then he pulled out his phone and typed 7 quiet words. He didn't hesitate before pressing send. The plane had barely leveled off when the turbulence began, not from the sky, but from inside Malik Rowe. He sat in seat 31E, body pressed between a man with too many carry-ons and a restless child whose foot seemed magnetically drawn to the back of his seat. He folded his arms and adjusted his breathing, trying to find a posture that wouldn't make him feel boxed in. There wasn't one. Row 31 was directly in front of the lavatories. A chemical scent hung in the air, sharp and synthetic. Passengers moved back and forth, brushing his shoulder as they passed. One even rested their hand briefly on the back of his seat, as if he were furniture. Malik leaned his head back, eyes closed. He'd been in tighter places, in tougher rooms. He had negotiated billion-dollar mergers from the sidelines. He had been the only black man in boardrooms full of polished indifference, but today hit different. Maybe it was Rachel Dempsey's voice. Maybe it was the way she had said that line is for first class without even checking his name. Maybe it was how she didn't blink when she demoted him. Or maybe it was how easy it had all felt for her. His phone buzzed in his lap. He glanced at it discreetly. A reply. 3 words from Noel Grant. Message received. Executed. He placed the phone face down on the tray table. No theatrics. No sudden moves. The man beside him. Jalen nudged him slightly. Hey, Jalen whispered. I don't mean to pry, but are you Malik Rowe? The guy from Cross Tech? Malik turned, surprised. His expression softened. That depends on who's asking. Jalen's face lit up. I watched your panel from the Athos conference, the one about ethical data strategy. That speech changed how I looked at this whole field. Malik gave a small smile. That was a few years back. I know, Jalen said. I was 16. I had no clue what I wanted to do. But you talked about legacy, about not just building for ourselves, but for the ones coming next. That hit me hard. Malik looked down for a moment, then back at him. What's your goal? To fly, Jalen said instantly. Not as a passenger, as a builder. I want to design systems that don't just work for the majority. I want to fly people who've never believed they'd be in the air. Malik nodded slowly. Hold on to that. They sat in silence for a moment as the beverage cart approached. When the flight attendant reached their row, she barely looked at them. Water, juice, soda, she asked, almost bored. Jalen ordered a ginger ale. Malik asked for tea. She handed the can and cup wordlessly and moved on. Jalen whispered, They really pack the empathy in first class. Malik chuckled under his breath. He didn't explain what had happened at the gate. He didn't need to. Some stories are already visible without narration. His phone buzzed again. He glanced briefly. A second message from Noel. Astrafly leasing flagged. Contact triggered. Malik set the phone down again. Somewhere. Quietly. Something had begun to shift. But the weight in his chest remained. Not because he wanted vengeance, not because he wanted an apology. What weighed on him was the familiarity of it all. This wasn't new. This wasn't shocking. It was routine. His thoughts drifted to his mother. She had worked security at a regional airport in Florida for 12 years, wore cheap shoes that tore at her ankles, and came home with stories about passengers who treated her like glass. Not something precious, something transparent, unseen. He remembered one evening she came home early, holding her shoes in her hands. They told me I can't use the break room restroom anymore, she'd said quietly. They said it's for supervisors. He was 10. He didn't understand why she cried behind the closed door, only that she did. He grew up promising himself one thing, to become the kind of man who could walk through any terminal and never have to explain himself again. And yet, here he was, explaining nothing, and still being questioned. From a few rows up, a voice carried back, loud, booming, confident. I always fly first class with Astrafly, the man said. They take care of their real customers. Laughter followed. Malik didn't flinch. He wasn't here to react. He was here to observe. The flight rolled forward. Somewhere near row 17 a child cried. Somewhere behind him. The bathroom door clicked open and shut. The rhythm of the aircraft was almost hypnotic. Malik closed his eyes and, for a moment, let the silence wrap around him. Then a voice returned to his mind. Rachel Dempsey's, sharp as glass. Sir, this line is for first class. The way she said sir without meaning it. The way she smiled when she erased his seat assignment. It wasn't anger Malik felt. It was something colder, something quieter. Conviction. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook. He flipped to a blank page and began to write. Just names, just dates, just actions. He wrote until the pen slowed. By the time the flight was halfway to Seattle, 4 more systems inside Astrafly's infrastructure had quietly flagged anomalies, lease terms, insurance triggers. A data architecture audit request was submitted by an independent firm, unrelated on the surface, but all of it coordinated, not a wrecking ball, just a shift in gravity, and gravity always wins. Cruising altitude, seatbelt sign off, Cabin lights dimmed. Malik Rowe remained still, centered in his cramped seat in row 31, though the world around him moved in waves. Passengers settled into naps or noise-canceling headphones. Someone sneezed 2 rows back. The overhead fan hummed faintly. Malik watched the seatback screen flicker before him, though he hadn't pressed play on anything. His tea had gone cold. His limbs were cramped, but his posture stayed calm. Next to him, Jalen Miles leaned back with earbuds in, scrolling through something on his tablet. Every now and then, he would glance at Malik, a curious energy beneath his respect, the kind of look young people give when sitting beside a figure they've only ever read about. Malik wasn't in the mood to talk. Not yet. His mind was sorting through what came next. He tapped his phone. 2 new updates, one from Kieran Dewan, legal scaffolding established, trigger conditions met, move at your call. Another from Noel. Keller's office reached out, declined to acknowledge request for comment. He stared at that line for a moment. Vivian Keller, CEO of Astra Fly. The same executive who, years ago, had smiled politely across a glossy conference table in Zurich and told him his proposal lacked long-term alignment with the company's vision. That wasn't the truth. The truth was simpler. He didn't fit the image they were selling. Back then, he had walked away without a word. He hadn't pushed back. He hadn't demanded anything, but he had remembered. And now they would too. He looked out the window. A stretch of clouds glided below them, soft as linen. There was something cleansing about altitude. It stripped everything down to the essentials. Malik breathed deeply. He reached into the front pocket of his backpack and pulled out a slim book, old, leather-bound, well-worn. Inside were newspaper clippings, folded notes, and a short letter in his mother's handwriting. He ran his fingers across her words without unfolding the page. In her final months, she had written often, usually short updates, reflections, a few poems. One of the last letters had said, "They will try to make you small. Don't argue, just keep building." He tucked the book away as Jalen suddenly removed an earbud and turned. "Sorry to interrupt again," he said softly, "but can I ask something?" Malik nodded. "Of course. Why didn't you say anything?" Jalen's voice was low but intense. "Back at the gate, I saw how she talked to you. You could have made a scene. You had every right to, but you didn't." Malik let the question hang for a moment. Then he answered. "Because sometimes," he said, "the real power is in what you don't give them, like your anger." Malik gave a quiet smile. "Exactly." Jalen nodded slowly. "That's hard." "It is," Malik said, "but it's necessary." They fell into a companionable silence. Up in first class, Rachel Dempsey was pouring champagne for a couple in business attire, chatting easily. She hadn't looked back once. She hadn't needed to. In her mind, the situation was resolved. Malik Rowe had complied. He had taken the seat he was given. She had moved on. She had no idea what was unfolding far above her pay grade, in a server center thousands of miles away. Astrafly's back end flagged a second anomaly. 2 aircraft leasing contracts tied to Cross North Holdings had been silently paused. Maintenance reports and usage logs were suddenly under compliance review. To most of the staff, it appeared as a routine systems audit. But to the few who understood what was really happening, it was the sound of foundation cracks forming. Jalen tilted his head. "You know," he said, "I told my advisor last month I didn't think there was a future for people like me in aerospace." Malik looked at him, eyebrows slightly raised. Jalen shrugged. Everyone in the program looks the same, talks the same, and they don't look like me. They don't look like you. And then you end up here, in seat 31, after everything you've built. And I think, if they can treat you like that, what hope do I have?" Malik exhaled slowly. "I get that." He paused, choosing his words, but the seat doesn't define the impact. Jalen was quiet. Malik added, "They didn't know who they were moving. That was their mistake, not yours." At that moment, a passenger 2 rows ahead stood to stretch and glanced back. Recognition flickered across his face. He pulled out his phone discreetly, snapped a photo, sent a message. Within minutes, the image appeared on Twitter. "Is that Malik Rowe in the back row of AF 726? Y'all remember what happened to him at the gate this morning?" The tweet gained traction quickly. Someone else posted a clip they had recorded from the terminal, Rachel Dempsey gesturing toward the economy line, her voice faint but her tone unmistakable. "This line is for first class, sir." The internet didn't need more context. They never did. Within 45 minutes, Amalekro and Io Astrobias were trending. On LinkedIn, a former Crosstech intern posted a photo of a handwritten note Malik once left for her, "You're never too quiet to lead." The caption read, "He taught me how to lead in silence." Looks like he's still doing it. Meanwhile, on board, Malik hadn't opened a single app. He simply closed his eyes and leaned his head back once more. The clouds outside were thinning. The sun above them had broken through. Light streamed in, soft and golden, cutting through the cabin like a gentle truth. He didn't need to announce anything. He just needed to stay in motion. On the 34th floor of Astrafly's headquarters in Denver, the view was breathtaking. From the corner office, you could see snow brushing the peaks of the Rockies, the clouds casting shadows over the city like slow-moving ships. Inside, however, the atmosphere was far from peaceful. Vivian Keller stood behind her desk, hands resting on the back of a leather chair. Her jaw was tight. Her assistant, a young man with wide eyes and trembling hands, hovered a few feet away holding a tablet. "You said flagged?" Vivian asked quietly. The assistant nodded. "Yes, ma'am. 2 aircraft leasing contracts. The back ends showing paused status. Initiated externally. We think it came from Cross North Holdings." Vivian's brow twitched. That name. It pulled something old from the recesses of her mind. "And you're telling me this now because Astrafly Finance didn't initiate it, and because someone from PR just flagged this too." He handed her the tablet. On the screen, a short video played in a loop. The camera was shaky, clearly taken from a smartphone. In it, Rachel Dempsey, their gate agent at Durham Brooks, was gesturing toward a black man in a hoodie. Her voice, though faint, was unmistakable. "This line is for first class, sir." Vivian's stomach dropped. "Who is that?" she asked, though part of her already knew. The assistant didn't answer. He simply pulled up the next post, a clearer photo. Same man, seated in row 31 on flight AF 726, hood pulled slightly back. The corner of his face turned just enough to be recognized by anyone who had ever seen him on a panel, in a magazine, or given a keynote. Malik Rowe. Vivian's throat tightened. She sat slowly, placing both palms flat on her desk. "No public statement," she said quietly. "Not yet." The assistant nodded, then hesitated. "Ma'am, may I ask, do you know him?" Vivian didn't look up. "I met him once." That was all she said. What she didn't say was this 7 years ago, at a closed-door investment summit in Zurich. Malik Rowe had pitched her board a logistics optimization partnership. She remembered how polished he was, how sharp, how ready, and how quickly they dismissed him, not because his idea wasn't good, it was, but because he wasn't who they expected. She had looked him in the eye that day and said, "It's not the right time for this direction, Mr. Rowe, but best of luck with your ventures." He had nodded once, said nothing, and left the room. That nod came back to her now, not in anger, but in something far more dangerous. Patience. On the screen, the trending hashtags had changed. Astra bias, receipt 31, row effect. Vivian exhaled, her hands now clasped in front of her mouth. Her head of public relations, Lisette Monroe, entered without knocking. Vivian glanced up. "You've seen it." Lisette nodded. She was composed, always, a tall black woman with a presence that filled whatever room she walked into. She placed a folder on the desk. "I've pulled all prior incidents related to gate disputes over the last 3 years. Rachel Dempsey's name comes up 4 times. Vivian stared. "No disciplinary action was ever taken." Lisette added. "Why not?" Lisette raised an eyebrow. "You'd have to ask HR, but I suspect no one wanted to escalate it until now." Vivian opened the folder. Reports, internal complaints, comments from passengers, none severe enough to go viral, but all painting a similar picture. A pattern. She closed the file. Lisette folded her arms. "We're going to have to respond. Soon." Vivian shook her head. "Not yet. If we move too fast, it looks reactive. If we move too slow, it looks careless." "It already looks careless," Lisette said calmly. Vivian flinched. The silence hung between them. "You think he planned this?" Vivian finally asked. Lisette gave a half-smile. "I think he's been planning for years." Vivian stood and walked to the window. Beyond the skyline, the world turned as usual. Planes ascended, buses moved through traffic. But here, inside this glass tower, everything felt frozen. Have legal monitor everything, lease agreements, partner companies, vendor relationships. If he moves again, I want to see it before it hits the surface. Lisette paused. "You understand what this is, right?" Vivian turned. "This isn't about a seat or a mistake at a gate. It's about the weight of one man who refused to yell and still made the building shake." Vivian didn't answer. Lisette continued, "And the internet is listening now." That night, news anchors whispered about a brewing storm. Social media feeds filled with side-by-side photos of Malik and Row 31 and headlines from Cross North's most successful partnerships. Think pieces began forming. Why are we still questioning black success in 2025? What happens when silence has leverage? And still, Malik Rowe had not said a word, not a post, not a tweet, not a quote, only the message he had sent from seat 31E, a message no one else had seen, but its echo was everywhere. By the time Flight AF 726 crossed into Oregon airspace, the story had crossed continents. It started as a ripple, one video, a few hundred retweets, a handful of Instagram stories, but now it was a wave. The clip of Rachel Dempsey denying boarding to Malik Rowe had been reposted over 100,000 times. It wasn't just the words she said, it was the tone, the ease, the assumption. It was how she never looked again after telling him to move. By noon, Pacific time, major news outlets had picked it up. CNN ran a banner, "Black CEO Forced to Economy." Was it racial profiling? The New York Times added context, "The quiet power of Malik Rowe." from boardroom to row 31. Even late-night talk show writers were scripting monologues, but the loudest voices weren't from studios. They came from people. A teacher in Chicago posted a video titled, "My students need to see this. This is how you stand tall while sitting down." A former airline pilot tweeted, "I've seen this kind of glitch happen too many times, and it never happens to men in suits who look like me." And then came a video from Jalen Miles. It was filmed quietly from his seat next to Malik, angled away to preserve his privacy. But Jalen spoke directly to the camera, eyes full of something between awe and disbelief. "I didn't know who I was sitting next to. Not at first. Just thought he was a regular guy who got bumped unfairly. But then I realized this man built the very systems that make half this plane run on time." He didn't yell. He didn't post. He just opened a notebook and wrote. He paused, and somehow the whole internet started screaming for him. The video exploded. Jalen's name began trending too. People praised him for speaking up. Others asked questions. Why was Malik Rowe an economy? Why was seat 2A given to someone else? The deeper the internet dug, the worse it got for Astrafly. A Reddit user unearthed flight logs from the past year, revealing a pattern: multiple first-class seats reassigned just before boarding. Several complaints buried in customer service queues. Each story had a common thread. The reassigned passengers were almost always people of color. At Astrafly headquarters, panic was no longer quiet. Vivian Keller stood in a glass-walled meeting room with her top executives. No one was sitting. No one was calm. Lisette Monroe was the first to speak. "We're not dealing with a viral moment. We're dealing with a systemic accusation. And we're losing the narrative by the second." Legal counsel entered with 2 folders and a tight expression. "We're receiving preliminary inquiries from the FAA and the Department of Transportation. They want a list of internal training policies and passenger profiling protocols." Vivian paced slowly. "What about Cross North?" she asked. Silence. Finally, someone from finance spoke. "They've frozen all active contracts, 5 aircraft leases, 40% of our premium fleet." Vivian froze. "And they're not answering calls," Lisette added, "because Malik Rowe doesn't need to call. He already moved the pieces." Vivian sat down slowly. Her hand trembled as she reached for a bottle of water. She whispered. "He waited for this." Lisette didn't disagree. Meanwhile, back in the sky, Malik hadn't spoken a single word about the unfolding chaos. He sipped his now lukewarm tea and watched the clouds pass beneath them. He heard the quiet notification pings from Jalen's phone beside him. The whispers from rows ahead as more passengers began to realize who he was. But Malik remained still, not aloof, not distant, simply grounded. He opened his notebook again. This time, he flipped to a page already filled with scribbled diagrams. It was a sketch of a program he had once drafted and shelved, a fund for marginalized students to enter aerospace engineering, logistics, air traffic control, piloting, all the entry points that had been locked for so long. He had called it the Vanguard Horizon. He hadn't launched it, not yet, because he had always known the world would not truly listen until the sky cracked. And now, the cracks were visible. The public outcry reached fever pitch when a former Astrafly employee came forward anonymously. She posted a thread on X. "I used to work in reservations. They never told us directly to downgrade black passengers, but they had a list of visual red flags that were heavily coded. Hoodies, unprofessional demeanor. I saw it. We all did. We were told to trust our instincts. Guess whose instincts got trusted? The thread was viewed over 12 million times in 6 hours. At that point, sponsors began to pull away. A major credit card partner paused its loyalty campaign with AstraFly. A hotel chain suspended its joint rewards program. And Malik, he sat in row 31, still silent, still watching, still waiting. Vivian Keller stared at the screen in front of her, eyes dry from hours without blinking. The public relations dashboard refreshed every 90 seconds. The numbers were no longer just metrics. They were pressure points. The hashtag, #Row Effect, had now reached over 30 million mentions across platforms. AstraFly's stock had taken a 7% dip by midday, and it was only trending downward. She'd fielded 2 calls from the board already. The third one would not be a conversation. It would be a decision. Still, she hadn't spoken to Malik Rowe. She didn't dare. Lisette Monroe stepped into her office again, this time without knocking. She held a folder in her hand. It was thin, too thin. "We have a bigger problem," she said. Vivian didn't look up. "Define bigger." Lisette placed the folder down gently on the table. "Rachel Dempsey. I ran a deeper search. Cross-checked HR complaints. She's had 3 internal reports filed against her in the last 2 years. Vivian slowly raised her eyes. For what Lisette opened the folder, passenger mistreatment, all escalated by co-workers who witnessed behavior they described as visibly discriminatory. Vivian's hands tensed. "And we did nothing." Lisette's tone was neutral. "They were marked inconclusive. HR passed them off as misunderstandings. No formal warning, no retraining." Vivian leaned back in her chair. "How did that not reach me?" Lisette didn't flinch, because it didn't have to. The system was built that way. Vivian looked away. For a brief moment, the mask slipped. Years ago, she had helped build that system, not out of malice, but out of efficiency. Streamline complaints, protect staff from false accusations, de-escalate conflicts before they became PR problems. But in doing so, she'd created something worse, a culture of quiet enablement. Vivian rubbed her temples. "She's still on duty." Lisette shook her head. "Not anymore. We pulled her from rotation after the video went viral." Vivian exhaled. "Put her on administrative leave, effective immediately." "She's going to need more than leave," Lisette added, "because the press is circling." Vivian looked up again. "What do they know?" "Not just about the video," Lisette said. About her history. There's a former employee ready to speak. She was the one who filed the first complaint. She left the company when nothing happened. A reporter from The Atlantic has her story now." Vivian closed her eyes. This wasn't just one gate agent's failure. It was exposure, and exposure demanded a sacrifice. Lisette continued, "We need to make a statement, one that acknowledges systemic flaws, not just an individual lapse. Otherwise, we'll look like we're scapegoating." Vivian opened her eyes. "I'm not ready to do that." Lisette's voice was calm but firm. "You don't have a choice." Meanwhile, across the country, in a quiet corner office of a private media firm in Atlanta, Kieran Dewan watched the entire situation unfold on a large monitor. He sipped green tea, leaned back in his chair, and sent a short message. Internal documents cross-verified, authorization secured, ready for release if greenlit, back in seat 31E. Malik Rowe read the same message on his screen and typed only one word in return: approved. At that very moment, Noel Grant sitting in her apartment in San Francisco, uploaded a 17-page PDF to a secure public repository. The file contained excerpts of internal Astrafly memos, anonymously sourced, time-stamped, and verified. Each page told a story. A manager urging Rachel Dempsey to trust her instincts with uncertain passengers. An HR lead suggesting that complaints from emotional flyers were rarely credible. A district supervisor praising her for maintaining brand image in difficult boarding situations. The document landed like thunder. Within an hour, journalists were dissecting it live. Screens lit up in newsrooms across the country. Astrafly knew. They had seen this behavior before, and they had chosen to look away. The noise grew deafening. On cable networks, pundits debated whether this was just one bad apple or the sign of a rotten orchard. On social media, employees from other airlines began chiming in, sharing their own experiences with profiling, ignored reports, and retaliation. It was no longer just about Malik. It was about everyone like him. Lisette watched the fallout unfold from the PR war room. She didn't flinch. She had known this moment was inevitable. The only question was how much truth Astrafly was willing to tell and how quickly. She dialed Vivian's office. The call connected in 2 rings. "Have you seen the documents?" Lisette asked. Vivian's voice was brittle. "Yes, this changes everything. I know. We have one move left," Lisette said. "Tell the truth, or go down with the lie." Vivian didn't answer right away, but somewhere inside her, something gave way. A quiet surrender to the weight of it all. A pause. Then came her voice. "Schedule the press conference." Rachel Dempsey sat alone on her couch, the afternoon light slanting sharply through half-closed blinds. Her living room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed in from all sides. Her television was on, volume low, set to a news channel she wasn't really watching. The anchor was talking about her. They didn't say her name directly, but the footage was there. The freeze frame. The phrase, "This line is for first class, sir," over and over, her voice, her posture, her face. A friend had sent her the clip 2 nights ago. She'd laughed it off at first, thinking it was just one of those weird moments that made the internet spiral. She hadn't even recognized the man in the hoodie. Just another difficult passenger. Or so she told herself. Now she couldn't stop hearing her own words. She muted the TV and stared at her phone. It buzzed every few minutes with another notification, another message from someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Some were cruel. Others were worse silent. One former colleague had messaged her late last night. "You should have known better." She tossed her phone onto the coffee table. It landed next to a half-empty wine glass and a takeout container she hadn't touched. In the corner of the room, her Astrafly blazer hung from a chair, navy blue, still crisp, a small stain near the collar she'd never bothered to clean. It looked like it belonged to someone else now. The email from HR was still unread. Subject: administrative leave pending review. She didn't need to open it. She knew what it said. She knew what was coming. The tone of the media coverage had shifted. What started as a story about Malik Rowe's mistreatment had now turned toward her. Her face was all over social media. People had dug up her high school yearbook photo, screenshots from her old Instagram. Even a comment she'd made on Facebook 6 years ago about dress codes keeping things professional had been reposted out of context. Or maybe not out of context. She wasn't even sure anymore. They were calling her a racist. Some were calling for her arrest. One comment had simply said she smiled while saying it. That's what haunts me." Rachel leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and buried her face in her hands. She wasn't a monster. She hadn't meant to humiliate anyone. Right. Her mind tried to rewind the scene at the gate. Malik had approached quietly, said he was in first class, showed his phone, boarding pass clear as day, and yet, she hadn't even checked twice. She told herself it was procedure, that she had made the call based on the information in front of her, but now, in the silence of her home, the excuses sounded thin. She'd made a decision in a split second. He didn't look like he belonged, and that instinct was the real problem, the kind she could never explain away with training manuals or protocol scripts. There had been other moments, too. Passengers she'd flagged for extra ID verification, travelers she redirected to other agents when their tone felt too aggressive. Families she watched more closely in the waiting area, and always, her gut told her it was about order, safety, professionalism, but what if her gut had been lying? What if it had been fear dressed as authority? She looked up at the television again. Now they were showing a side-by-side shot. Malik seated in row 31, and then another image of him from a tech conference keynote, standing behind a podium, thousands in the audience. The contrast was staggering. Rachel hadn't known who he was. That part was true. But did it matter? Would she have treated him differently if she had known? The answer hung heavy in her chest. She got up and walked to the kitchen, poured water from the tap, but didn't drink. She stared out the window instead, where the sky had turned gray, heavy with the threat of rain. A notification pinged on her laptop. It was an article, newly published. Former co-workers speak out about gate agent Rachel Dempsey's history of profiling. She clicked anonymous testimonies, lines she remembered saying, now quoted back to her like warnings she ignored, words she couldn't take back. "I just don't think that guy looked like he had a first-class ticket. They're always trying to sneak into business. You have to be firm. We can't let the brand feel cheap. Each one hit harder than the last." The comments beneath the article scrolled endlessly, and somewhere in the flood of posts, one stuck out. A woman named Kira, who claimed to have been the first to file a complaint against Rachel 2 years earlier. She wrote, "They told me it was a misunderstanding. They said she meant well, but I remember the way she looked at me, like I was a problem she had to solve." Rachel closed the laptop. She didn't cry. She couldn't, because crying would mean admitting that the woman in all these headlines was real. And until this week, she'd never thought of herself as dangerous. But maybe danger didn't always wear a uniform or carry a weapon. Maybe sometimes it wore a smile, and a clipboard, and an airline badge. Maybe it was in the choices no one questioned. Until now, the wheels touched down in Seattle with a gentle thud. Malik Rowe did not applaud, did not sigh in relief. He simply opened his eyes as the plane slowed on the runway. Outside the small window, morning fog hung low over the tarmac like a veil. Seat 31E emptied slowly. Passengers ahead of him shuffled out with backpacks and briefcases, chatting softly, some stealing subtle glances back at him. He didn't return them. He moved deliberately, retrieving his backpack from under the seat. Jalen, still beside him, gave a quiet nod of respect. "Thanks for letting me sit next to you," he said. Malik nodded once. "Stay curious, stay steady." And then he walked off the plane without fanfare, his steps unhurried. As he exited the gate and into the terminal, He saw Noel Grant already waiting, dressed in slate gray slacks and a simple blouse. She looked both professional and unbothered by the dozens of eyes currently fixated on her boss. "Good morning," she said. Malik gave a dry smile. "Depends who you ask." They didn't speak more until they reached the private car outside. It was a dark, nondescript sedan. The driver greeted Malik with a quiet nod. Once inside, Noel handed him a tablet. "Keller's board is in emergency session. 3 investors walked. Lisette Monroe is negotiating with a crisis firm, but the leaks hit 3 publications this morning." Malik swiped through headlines as the car pulled into motion. Gate agent's history revealed in leaked files. Former Astra fly staff say racism was routine. The man in seat 31E and the silence that shook the skies. He passed the tablet back to her. "Kieran, in the conference room already. Sanctions drafted. Lease withdrawal letters signed. We're ready to move." Malik looked out the window as the skyline blurred by. "Do it." Noel didn't hesitate. She made the call. In under 15 minutes, 3 independent entities received final authorization to begin a coordinated exit of all assets tied to Astrafly Airlines. Cross North Holdings recalled 2 leased aircraft. Nova Bridge Finance, a quiet partner of Rowe and North, froze all active credit lines extended to the airline. And Kieran Darwin filed a formal notice of litigation citing breach of contract and discriminatory practices. None of these moves required Malik's name, but everyone knew exactly who moved the pieces. At Astrafly headquarters, the impact was immediate. Departments scrambled. Planes scheduled for international routes were suddenly grounded for maintenance checks they didn't expect. Capital reserves plummeted by 20% overnight. Emails between legal, finance, and communications began to blur in tone from urgent to desperate. Vivian Keller stood in her office, her blazer now folded over the back of a chair. She had stopped pretending to be composed. Lisette entered with a printed document. "This is it," she said, "the official revocation notice. Our leases are gone, our credit is gone, and by tomorrow, our operating authority on half the East Coast will be under federal review." Vivian looked down at the page, and then she whispered. He never raised his voice. Lisette nodded. No, he didn't have to. Vivian sank into her chair. "He's not trying to embarrass us," she murmured. "He's replacing us." Back in Seattle, Malik arrived at the downtown offices of Rowe and North Analytics. The lobby was quiet, a subtle hum of machines and whispered greetings from passing staff. Kieran was waiting in the glass conference room, sleeves rolled up, laptop open, execution complete. He said, "But you should know, media's painting this as a takedown. You're being called the man who collapsed an airline." Malik sat, calm. "I didn't collapse anything." Kieran studied him. "They did that. I just exposed the fracture." Noel joined them, placing a new folder on the table. "What's this?" Malik asked. She opened it. "Draft proposal for the Vanguard Horizon Fund. You asked me to revisit it." He leaned forward. Inside were detailed plans, scholarships, partnerships with aerospace engineering programs, pilot academies, internship pipelines for air traffic control, airline strategy, and operations. He turned the pages slowly, reading every line. "They're going to ask what we're trying to prove," Noel said quietly. Malik didn't look up. "I'm not trying to prove anything," he said. "I'm trying to build what should have existed already." Silence settled over the room. Then he looked out the window, toward the horizon. They took away a seat. He said, So I bought the plane. The building trembled before it crumbled. Not from earthquake or fire, but from pressure, from truth, from the weight of everything that had been ignored. By the next morning, the front page of nearly every major financial publication carried some version of the same headline, Astra Fly and Freefall investors pull out after racial discrimination scandal stock had dropped another 13% overnight. 3 senior board members resigned before noon. 2 more stopped returning calls entirely. Anonymous sources inside the company told reporters that internal morale had hit historic lows, and the Federal Aviation Administration had issued an official notice of audit, not just of Astra Fly's gate protocols, but of its passenger reassignment logs, complaint resolution system, and hiring records for the last 5 years. The announcement came with a press release. Discrimination in commercial aviation is a matter of national interest. That one sentence echoed through newsrooms. Vivian Keller sat in a private legal office downtown, surrounded by attorneys, her voice hoarse from hours of closed-door meetings. Her posture was tight, spine straight, but the armor she once wore had started to crack around the edges. Her phone buzzed again. Another missed call from a former partner. Lizette Monroe sat across from her, watching carefully. "They're going to ask you to step down," she said. Vivian didn't argue. "I built this airline," she whispered. Lizette nodded. "And now you'll be remembered for how you let it die." Vivian looked at her. "You think I deserve this?" Lizette paused, then said gently, "I think the truth always arrives. Eventually." Vivian looked down at her hands. They were so quick to run. She murmured, "The partners, the sponsors, even my own board, because they weren't invested in change," Lisette said, "only in control." Vivian didn't answer. Somewhere beneath her silence was the awareness that this didn't happen overnight. The policies, the warnings, the years of minor complaints brushed aside because they didn't make headlines. She had been warned, but she hadn't listened. And now she couldn't silence the sound of a man not yelling, just moving. In Seattle, the offices of Rowe and North Analytics remained calm. Inside a quiet corner of the operations floor, Noel clicked through a live news stream showing the Astra Fly press briefing. Reporters crowded into a whitewashed conference room. Cameras clicked, lights glared. Vivian Keller stepped up to the podium, flanked by corporate counsel and a company spokesperson. She looked different, not defeated, but deflated, effective immediately. She began, "I am resigning from my role as Chief Executive Officer of Astra Fly Airlines." Reporters shouted questions before she even finished the sentence. "Did you know about the internal complaints against Rachel Dempsey? Why did you ignore warnings about racial profiling? Have you personally spoken to Malik Rowe?" Vivian paused. Her eyes flicked toward the camera lens, and for a moment, she saw her reflection there, not just her image, but her legacy. She answered quietly, "No, I haven't spoken to Mr. Rowe." A longer pause, but I believe he's already said everything that needed to be said. With that, she stepped away from the microphone. It wasn't a grand ending. There was no applause, no music, no tightly choreographed farewell, just the sound of a system folding inward. Across the country, employees at regional Astra Fly hubs received abrupt notices. Ground crews were told to stand down. Customer service reps were handed scripts they weren't allowed to deviate from. Travelers canceled flights. Frequent flyers transferred points to other airlines, hoping not to get caught in the turbulence. Jalen Miles, sitting at his shared dorm desk, watched the press conference live. His inbox was full. News agencies wanted to talk to him. Blogs asked for interviews. University peers flooded his social media with messages of admiration. But Jalen hadn't said yes to any of them. He kept coming back to one line Malik had said to him on that flight. Stay curious, stay steady. So instead of speaking to cameras, he sat down and wrote a letter. To Malik, it was short. You changed how I see the sky. Thank you for not yelling. Malik read it the next morning and said nothing out loud. He simply closed the email with a small nod, because sometimes the only acknowledgement needed is quiet understanding. In New York, the Wall Street Journal ran an op-ed titled The Rise of Silent Power. It dissected the strategy, the precision, and the total absence of emotional reaction from Malik Rowe throughout the entire ordeal. The writer compared him to a chess player who wins by letting the opponent believe they're in control until the final move. And that move, one seat, one decision, one unstoppable consequence. By the week's end, Astrofly's assets were frozen. Multiple departments were under federal scrutiny. And a coalition of civil rights groups announced they would be pushing for sweeping reform legislation in airline passenger rights. They named it the Rowe Standard. Malik declined all requests for comment. He had already moved on. There were no banners, no sponsor logos, no media wall, no overproduced music playing in the background, just a black microphone clipped to a simple wooden podium, set beneath the early evening sky in a quiet corner of Seattle's waterfront park. A few chairs had been set up, nothing flashy, just enough for press and guests. Behind them, the bay shimmered in the fading light, and the wind moved gently through the leaves. Malik Rowe stepped forward. He wore a gray button-down shirt, sleeves rolled neatly at the forearms. His posture was relaxed, measured, a man at ease with the silence before the storm. For days, the world had been waiting for him to speak. Now, he did. I didn't plan on speaking today, Malik began, his voice smooth and unhurried. He paused, let the air settle. I planned to get on a plane, to sit in my assigned seat, to fly across the country and make a meeting. Another pause, but something else happened. The audience leaned in. I was told to move, not with anger, not with shouts, just with practiced dismissal. A voice that said the same line to hundreds of people without remembering a single one. Malik looked down for a moment, then back up. This line is for first class, sir. He let the words hang, familiar now, echoed across millions of screens. I've heard versions of that sentence my whole life, sometimes in boardrooms, sometimes in elevators, sometimes in silence. I didn't yell, he said softly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand a spotlight. I took the seat they gave me and let them see what followed. He stepped away from the mic for a moment, then back. This isn't about one woman. It's not about one airline. It's about a system of quiet choices, small assumptions that stack like bricks until someone is buried beneath them. Someone gets overlooked, reassigned, erased. He took a breath. My mother worked as a baggage handler for 20 years. She came home every night with sore hands and a full heart. She told me once that the most dangerous words in America are, "You don't belong here." He looked up, locking eyes with no one and everyone at once. Belonging is not something you earn through proximity. It's something you affirm through policy, through practice, through presence, and when someone strips that from you, The answer is not to scream, it's to build. The wind shifted slightly, lifting the edge of a page he had resting beside him. He closed it gently. I didn't ground Astrafly. I didn't cancel their flights or write their policies. They did that. He gestured with his hand, palm open. I just let the truth catch up. Silence fell again, thick and reverent. Then he continued. Today, I want to talk about what comes next. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. This is the mission statement for the Vanguard Horizon Fund. We will provide scholarships for young black students entering aerospace engineering, logistics, operations, and aviation law. We will partner with institutions that commit to ethical hiring and inclusive advancement. We will open doors that have long been kept locked behind cultural codes and closed networks. He looked out across the crowd. We're not asking for seats anymore. We're building the aircraft. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras clicked. But Malik didn't flinch. He wasn't performing. He was planting something. The kind of seed that grows in the cracks of broken things. In the last week, I've been called a disruptor, a power broker, even a silent assassin. He chuckled softly, the first lightness in his voice. But I'm just a man who got tired of asking for permission to exist. He stepped back slightly from the microphone. This isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who we are. The applause didn't erupt. It built slowly, like a wave pulled in by gravity, like respect being returned after years of delay. Malik nodded once, and then walked away. No interviews, no Q&A, only intention, only forward. The morning after Malik Rowe's speech, the world felt different, not louder, not wilder, just more awake. The clip of him standing under the soft Seattle sky had already reached 42 million views. Not because he'd said anything shocking, but because he had said what needed to be said with stillness, with clarity, with the kind of conviction that didn't beg for applause but demanded reflection. Inside a small office tucked between two coffee shops near Georgetown University, a young woman named Leah Owens hit send on an application. She had seen Malik's speech from her dorm room. Her father had been a flight mechanic before losing his job to downsizing. She'd always dreamed of working in aviation, but could never quite figure out where she fit in. Now, she had direction. The Vanguard Horizon Fund was accepting its first round of scholars. By the end of the week, more than 6,000 applications had come in. Malik didn't review them himself, but he made sure every essay was read by someone who believed in potential over pedigree. Noelle Grant oversaw the logistics. She had turned the Vanguard office into a heartbeat of hope. Kieran managed the legal framework. The fund's first grants would go out in 2 weeks, and the donations poured in. Anonymous transfers, tech giants making quiet amends, even airline executives, some privately, some publicly sent pledges. Not all out of guilt, some out of genuine recognition that Malik wasn't trying to burn the system. He was trying to rewire it. Back in Seattle, Malik remained deliberately out of the spotlight. He didn't give interviews. He didn't pose for photos. When asked what the secret was to his silence, he only said, "I had more to do." He spent his time walking, through neighborhoods where kids played with paper planes, through community centers where veterans remembered when they used to trust flying, through schools where students whispered about STEM careers like they were distant dreams. At one of these schools, he visited a 4th-grade classroom. The teacher, a soft-spoken woman with calloused hands and tired eyes, asked him to speak to the class. He hesitated at first, Then he sat on the edge of a low desk and looked at the students. "What's something that flies besides a plane?" he asked. A boy in the front shouted, "A bird," another said, "A balloon," a girl whispered, "A dream." Malik smiled. "Right answer." He said. In that same week, a new headline broke: FAA adopts the row standard for passenger equity protocols. The directive included mandatory bias training for all gate and cabin crew across commercial airlines. Complaint systems had to be restructured for independent review. Algorithms used in passenger screening were to be audited for bias. The industry didn't change overnight, but it moved, because one man chose not to fight fire with fire. He built something better at the now-defunct headquarters of Astra Fly. The building remained empty, its signage stripped. The parking lot cracked. A for lease sign hung at the entrance. Lisette Monroe had left long before the final shutdown. She had since joined a nonprofit aviation ethics coalition. Her first policy paper was titled Lessons in Silence. She cited Malik's name only once, but it was enough. As for Vivian Keller, she disappeared from the headlines. Rumors circulated about her attempting to start a consulting firm, but the trust was gone. The quiet nods she once received at industry events had turned to sideways glances and strained smiles. She had built an empire, but she'd ignored its foundations, and Malik Rowe. He didn't attend galas, didn't throw ceremonies, but he did show up to the Vanguard offices every Monday morning, sat at the long table with his team, asked questions, listened, adjusted course. One afternoon, Noelle stepped into his office with an envelope. "You should open this," she said. He raised a brow. "What is it?" "It's from Jalen." Malik opened the letter slowly. Inside was a photograph. Jalen Miles, wearing a pilot's training uniform, standing beside a small jet. A hand raised in salute, a quiet grin on his face. On the back, 4 words were written in clean print: "I'm ready to fly." Malik set the photo on his desk and looked out the window. Beyond the glass, a group of young interns were being led through the hall by Kieran, each one holding a notepad, each one looking up, not down. He watched them for a long time. No need to speak. The future was already listening. The airport looked the same polished floors, same muffled announcements from overhead speakers, same hurried passengers dragging their lives behind them in wheeled bags. But for Malik Rowe, something had changed. He stood near Gate 41, not far from the place where everything had begun. A different terminal, a different airline, but the air still held the familiar tension, the unspoken dance of status, of protocol, of invisible rules that told some people they belonged and others they did not. Today was not about revenge. It was not even about full-circle endings. It was about watching the world take one step forward. Beside him stood a young woman in a navy blazer with silver trim, badge clipped neatly to her lapel. Her name was Tasha Daniels. She was 26 years old and had just finished her second week as a gate operations supervisor. Tasha had grown up in Newark, raised by a grandmother who worked nights at the airport cleaning planes. She knew what it meant to be invisible, but today she was not. She stood upright, steady, checking boarding passes, greeting passengers with grace, and every so often she glanced at Malik, not with fear or awe, but quiet gratitude. He wasn't here for a meeting. He wasn't flying anywhere. He was just watching. At one point, Tasha approached him. "Mr. Rowe," she said, "we're honored to have you at our gate." He gave her a gentle smile. "You're the one doing the work." A child walked past, dragging a red backpack, clutching a toy jet in one hand. He looked up at Malik and paused. "Are you the airplane guy?" he asked. Malik chuckled. "Something like that." The boy's mother apologized quickly, but Malik knelt down. "You ever been on a plane before?" The boy shook his head. "You will," Malik said, "and you'll sit wherever you choose." The boy beamed. As they walked away, Noelle arrived, holding her phone. "They're ready," she said. Malik nodded. Together, they headed toward the conference room built right inside the terminal, a collaboration between the new Airline Equity Council and the Vanguard Horizon Fund. It had become a hub for real-time education, workshops, and training. Inside, a group of newly hired gate agents waited, some nervous, some eager, all listening. Malik stood at the front of the room. No slides, no script. "I'm not here to tell you how to do your jobs," he said. "I'm here to remind you why your job matters." He walked slowly across the room. "Every seat you assign is a chance to undo a story someone was forced to believe about themselves. Every greeting you offer is a moment to affirm worth. Every silence you break, every bias you examine, it counts." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You may not always be thanked, you may not always be seen, but I promise you what you do here echoes far beyond this gate." The room was quiet. Then one of the new agents, a young Latino man named Emilio, raised his hand. "Do you ever feel like it wasn't worth it?" Malik took a long breath. "Some days I feel tired. Some days I feel the weight of what was lost, what had to break for truth to rise. But then I see you. I see the people you'll serve, the barriers you'll refuse to accept, the lives you'll make easier just by standing firm. And that's more than worth it." Outside the window, a plane took off, its nose tilted skyward, its wheels tucked beneath. It rose. Later that evening, Malik walked alone through the terminal. The crowds had thinned. The lights dimmed slightly, casting warm shadows along the gates. He stopped at a bench and sat down. From his coat, he pulled a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the corners, creased from use. Jalen's photo. On the back, the words, "I'm ready to fly." Malik smiled. A janitor passed by, pushing a mop bucket. He nodded politely. "Late night?" he asked. "Something like that." Malik replied. The janitor paused, then looked closer. "You're that guy, aren't you?" From the airline story, Malik didn't confirm or deny. Instead, he asked, "What do you remember about it?" The man leaned on his mop. "I remember you didn't yell. I remember you sat in the back, and the world flipped anyway." He chuckled. "Never seen anything like it." Malik nodded. "That's the point," he said. "So we don't have to see it again." The janitor nodded back, gave a slight salute, and returned to his work. Malik watched him disappear down the hallway. He stood up slowly, stretched, and began to walk, not toward a gate, but toward whatever came next. Behind him, the monitors glowed softly. Flight 182 on time. Gate 41. Now boarding somewhere. Someone was taking their first flight, maybe even sitting in first class for the first time. And this time, there was no gatekeeper holding a silent bias. There was only policy, only preparation, only welcome. Malik Rowe walked out into the night air. The sky above was clear. The legacy was in motion, not because of what he destroyed, but because of what he helped others imagine, and what they chose to build. Together. What started with a seat denied ended with a system exposed. Malik Rowe never raised his voice. He never called for revenge, but through quiet strength, relentless integrity, and a refusal to look away, he dismantled a legacy of silent discrimination, one policy at a time. This story isn't just about one airline or one gate agent or even one CEO. It's about all the moments when people are told, this line isn't for you, this seat isn't yours, this space doesn't belong to people like you. And it's about the people who refuse to shrink in the face of that injustice, not with rage, but with resolve. Malik didn't just cancel a flight. He changed the course of the industry. And more importantly, he created a path for those who've been waiting far too long to board. We hope this story moved you. We hope it made you feel something. If it did, don't let it stop here. Leave a comment below and tell us what stood out most. Like the video if it opened your eyes. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And hit subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful story on our channel. Because silence may be powerful, but your voice helps carry these stories even further. Until next time, stay awake, stay kind, and always look deeper.